Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Today on the podcast, my guest is Pete Havel. Pete is a former political operative who has become an authority on workplace cultures and office politics. Lately, he's been focusing his efforts on teaching leaders and companies about the dangers of toxic environments and toxic employees. He is the author of The Arsonist in the Office, which is an amazing book about what can happen when cultures go wrong. As a leader or a future leader, you are not going to want to miss this episode. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Pete Havel, who has a really interesting background. He spent most of his career in the bare-knuckle world of politics, where he worked as a lobbyist, a consultant, and an expert in crisis communication. But lately his focus has been on office politics and the problem of toxic work environments. He is the author of The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. And Pete is an expert on dealing with the problem of toxic employees. So I'm so glad he could join us today. So Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Well, you have a very interesting career history. So I spend most of my time dealing with people who lead businesses and lead organizations, but you come from a completely different world, and that's the world of politics. So I briefly introduced you, but tell us a little bit more about your background, before you came into writing books and what have you.
Sure. So I've spent most of my career in positions that probably disqualify me from being listened to by much of your audience. And that is, I was a lobbyist. I was paid, and I was good at reading people, dealing with half answers, half truths, no truths, and building relationships in very complicated circumstances. I would put the dysfunction of a legislative session or that crunch time during a political campaign up against some of the most bizarre atmospheres in the world. Mm-hmm. And I had done well in them and had thought I had run into about every type of difficult personality imaginable until I joined the firm. And that's what turned me into the author that I am today.
Okay. And we're going to get into that because that's really interesting, what happened to you and your experience and how you turned that into the book that I have right here in my hands. So, first, Pete, I want to say that we met online a while back because we share a common interest, and that is fire. And let me explain. So I had written several articles. I was a former naval officer on submarines. I'd written several articles about the problem of fires on a submarine, right? We were taught being on a submarine, we were taught that you run towards a fire. You ignore your natural instincts, run toward the fire and put it out before it gets out of control. And so I use that analogy when I teach leaders that problems are like fires, right? You have to run towards them and you have to put them out before they get out of control, right? And so I was writing about leaders needing to run towards the fire, and you were writing about people in organizations who actually start fires, the arsonists. And that was kind of interesting. So did I get that story right? Where we
You nailed it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have a very common interest in fires. So who are these arsonists in the office? How do we recognize them? What are their effects on organization? Who are these people?
They are people, and I guess let me tell through the story in the book. Mm-hmm. I got hired unknowingly to work with the untouchable employee that had caused so much damage, so much strife, freaked the management out so much within the organization with false accusations and threatened lawsuits and stirring up trouble that they had decided better to keep them inside the organization where we know what they're doing than outside, and just worry about what they might do from there. An arsonist is somebody who has a little bit of power that has the ability to take that power and use it against the organization. Knowingly or unknowingly, they may just be wired differently than everybody else. But arsonists, as defined in real life, are people that burn things down, that are motivated by wanting power, wanting to use it against people, wanting revenge, profit motives, just wanting to see stuff burn. And the people in the office, and I'm sure your listeners are imagining these people now, there's a lot of people in the workplace that are the same way, that like torching stuff, either for the fun of it or to knock somebody out of a position or to get that promotion over somebody else or revenge, you name it. There's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Someone once told me, there's a leadership quote that says, leaders need to make sure everybody's rowing in the same direction. And somebody added something to it, which I thought was good. It said, and they also have to make sure that there's no one drilling holes in the bottom of the boat. And the truth is that there are some people, for whatever reason, that think it's fun to drill holes in the bottom of the boat while everybody's trying to row hard. And I think your experience clearly showed that.
It is. And when what I talk about in the book so much is what happens when leaders, the people that are calling out those signals to the rowers, know that it's happening, and the signals that sends when you're seeing people sabotage the work of the organization.
That's what makes this book remarkable. I think it really stands out in my mind that I'm really excited you put this into a story. But just seeing the way management dealt with the problem, or didn't deal with the problem, right? They just let the fire burn. They ran, instead of running towards the fire, they ran away from the fire, right? And they just let it burn out of control. And it's that's probably one of the more exceptional things about this story, because it's a cautionary tale of what not to do as a leader when you have an employee like this.
That's right. And you having been in a contained atmosphere as somebody that was a commander of a sub, knows that impact of what happens if you let the fire get out of control, that there's going to be a few seconds, and this is kind of where my leadership was, there was going to be that temporary safety of, I'm not going to get burned by this situation. But you let those fires go, there's not much room to hide.
There's no room to hide.
You either need to deal with it, or it's going to consume you as well. And really, that is where, and we're seeing it now with so many things, the Houston Astros, Boeing, so many of the things that are in the news where organizations let trouble start and leaders just kind of look the other way. Yeah. Things are going to catch up at some point.
And the fire, and just like the story of the fire on the submarine, it burns out of control. Instead of doing minor damage, it does major damage, right?
That's
so
right.
It burns these companies to the ground, essentially, their reputation and what have you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So the book is interesting. I like the fact that you wrote it as a fictional story. And so you brought into the story of a man in this organization, and he's dealing with this toxic coworker. And you intertwine the story, the fictional story, with actual lessons to be learned, which I found really powerful. So why did you write the book that way, fictional and then intertwining lessons like that? Because I thought that was a really great way to tell the story.
Sure. And my experience, what I did was fictionalize my story, because I didn't want it to be a tell-all in an organization that nobody cared about around the country, around the world, heck, outside of my own life. But I had a powerful story to tell that, as I told others, my cautionary experience, friends, one-on-one, what had happened. I had a lot of people saying, Pete, you ought to write a book about this. And frankly, I thought that was a way to end the coffee meeting and, just get me to move on with something. But as I thought more about it, I had frankly had the perfect storm of a weakened management experience, seeing the the impact of what happens when an organization's culture goes bad. So I very much wanted to tell my story because, as we know, whether it's the Bible or TV or you name it, parables and stories help people understand what happens.
Yes.
And I hear this a lot from folks that either review my book or send me a note online or anything like that. You've got to understand, to fully understand what happens when a culture breaks down, you have to know the personal impact. And for me, I had my career knocked out from under me. And I wanted people, not in a woe's me kind of way, but a way to understand this can happen to you.
Yes.
Or leaders, this can happen to your company if you're not careful.
Yes.
Because that self-preservation that you talk about of people running away from the fire, it's an instinct.
Yes.
But to run to the fire, that you have to be trained in.
Yes. Yeah. No, I like that. And I think I like your terminology you use, which is fireproofing the organization. Like how do you prevent or how do you deal with these kind of situations that come up? I don't want to get too much in the story because I really want my listeners to get this book and to read it or also listen to it on Audible. I think the Audible book is really good how you used different voices for the different characters. You had different actors or I guess or friends. But I really like the Audible version of this book, by the way. I really like that. But the scene in the Chinese restaurant in the early part of the story, and I don't want to give away too much, but so you have the antagonist, and then her name in the book is Hazel, and you have this scene in the Chinese restaurant, which is it's amazing. Like it's hard to believe when you're reading the story. You're just like, oh my goodness, this is just a terrible situation. And I think you did a masterful job of putting the reader in your shoes and being in that meeting. And I just think that's a really great and powerful. And you talked about using a fictional story to draw people in. I think that scene alone, and I won't reveal what happens in the scene, but I think that really brings people into the realization of what can happen to you when you least expect it. You know, you had mentioned that you'd worked with all sorts of different personality types and just figured, well, I could work with this person as well. But just remarkable. And I think that story, just that one scene illustrates how things can change instantly in an organization and with your relationship with a toxic employee.
No doubt. And what that illustrates, and again, I'll let other folks read it if they'd like to. What happened there was I'd been basically assigned to be cannon fodder for the untouchable employee. And my manager was afraid of this employee as well. She had come after her at one point. And to mitigate the situation, mix two chemicals together and see what happens, she said, why don't you two go out to lunch together?
Yeah.
And this was the person who had filed at that point. They had lost track of how many false complaints she had filed against people within the organization. And I was sent into the situation of either I defy my boss saying I need to go out to lunch with this person, or I deal with the worst human resources nightmare of all time. And, no good wins are going to come out of that situation if you're me. Right. And, but it really points to that weak leadership that you don't put anybody in this situation if you're not willing to take on the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I people need to read this book because that scene alone, you're just going to be I think my mouth was like wide open, like, holy cow. It went
now I'm having flashbacks, John.
Yeah, sorry. But I just know it just happened in an instant, and it can happen to any one of us in an instant like that. So I think it's a powerful story. So read the book because you got to read the Chinese restaurant scene. But so you've touched on it, and I think this being a leadership podcast, I want to talk about this, is that in this case and in the story, the leadership knew there was a problem. They knew about Hazel, right? They knew she was toxic, but they didn't take care of it. So what did leadership fail to do in your story? What was the problem with leadership when they had a toxic employee who was falsely accusing a lot of people, causing problems in the organization, just lighting fires to see what will happen. What did they do wrong? What did leadership get wrong in this case?
Sure. And number one is that that thing we've already talked about just a little bit of, if you've got a problem, you need to address it, because fires don't get better. Cancer doesn't get better. A whole lot of things in life, if you leave them alone, are not going to get better if they're problems. The other big thing, and I've had a lot of people say to me after they read the book, why didn't they just write a check? And because it's a financial issue. And the question is, what is your math equation when you're writing that check or deciding to not write a check and keep somebody internal? And so many people just look at it as, well, you're paying off somebody for the salary, and we're going to weigh that salary cost versus the hit we might take from bringing somebody else in. So they just look at it as a trade-off of employees, but they don't look at the financial impact. They don't beyond that because they don't view the legal risk. Frankly, that could have come from me in terms of my experience there, which went wheels off very quickly because of some actions that were taking place. They don't look at the attraction and retention of good employees that watch what's happening, look at an organization who's come off the moorings in terms of their culture and say, I don't want to be in this place anymore. Their reputation gets hurt. And then productivity takes a nosedive. A lot of studies say 30 to 40%. And then healthcare costs, and whether it's mental or physical, those start going through the roof. And you talk to companies that closely track medications, for instance. These days, you can find out in the aggregate how much you're paying for certain drugs from some of your healthcare providers, and you can see the spikes, frankly, at different times a year for how much people are paying for high blood pressure medication, for all sorts of things dealing with stress. And there's a lot of different things that companies don't put into that equation. But the biggest one is, if you know what the right thing is to do, figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. I think, and I've written about this as well, is that when you have a problem employee and leadership doesn't address the issue, it affects the morale of all the good people in the organization. It affects everybody in the organization because they see a problem employee that nobody's doing anything about it. And so then, as you mentioned, morale, good people leave, people are having health issues because they're stressed. So when you don't address a problem as a leader, and then this thing's just in the analogy, it burns. It's a fire that burns out of control.
That's right. And I forgot about one other issue, and that is, and I think great managerial theorists would call this the hold my beer theory. And that is, you probably, if your hiring has been such that you're letting stuff slide and your management style has let problems go, you probably got more than one problem out there. Yeah. And your employees that may kind of lean more towards Hazel, looking for a little bit of trouble, thinking I can cut a corner or I can cut the whole side of something to get deals done, or to do all sorts of unethical things. You're opening a Pandora's box of all sorts of issues, and I witnessed that as well, where employees got the message that it's anything goes, and anything was going. No, it's not good, and that's it. I mean, I talk a lot about leadership matters, right? So leadership does matter, and if you take an absent management position where you're absent and you're not taking action, things can get out of control pretty fast. And in your case, it wasn't just you; it was all sorts of other employees had to deal with this particular individual. So it's because the leadership didn't do their job. That's right.
Yeah. So unfortunately, toxic employees aren't just fictional. They're not just in stories. This is real life. And it seems like we're seeing a lot of it more and more in the news. You touched on a few of them earlier. But what are some recent stories that you've heard which shows how important it is to get on top of toxic cultures or toxic people. Maybe some things that have made the headlines lately that just show an example of where this isn't just theoretical. This is happening day in and day out with organizations.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and I mentioned the Astros. Let me touch on them with being spring training and all. We saw with them, and it all depends on who you believe in the story, because you have a lot of people in cover mode on that. But you have an interview by now former manager AJ Hinch, who traced all their problems back to an intern who came up with a cheating scheme.
Oh, interesting.
That the intern put together a spreadsheet, and some other people found this spreadsheet to be something that they could use to signal when balls and strikes were coming in from the other team. And the manager, Hinch, looked at this and decided that, it was okay because there was just nothing he could do, that there were too many people that thought that this was a good idea. So here was a leader who is essentially trying to pass off, now that he's out of the job, saying that an intern was the reason for all of this bad activity within the organization that is now has little leaguers refusing to wear their uniforms. And
wow,
the value of the team.
And they blame it on an intern. Blame it on an intern, right?
Blame it on an intern. And here's a guy that was making literally millions of dollars a year, won a World Series, but is now will be known for the rest of his life as a cheater, and a guy who, whether it's his version or anybody else's version, watched stuff happen and did literally nothing. And now the organization is in turmoil, their reputation's down, and the owner that saw that World Championship trophy come to Houston probably has a team that's worth less than it was even a few months ago.
So there's a great example of where a leader didn't do anything, like where they knew something was wrong but didn't take the action, which is very similar to your story. So it's actually not leaders doing the wrong thing, it's doing nothing when they see a problem or a behavior that is potentially damaging, and they just let that fire just get bigger and bigger. He didn't take action against it, right? That's
right. And I really think, whether from a communication standpoint or from a managerial standpoint, I'm going to get a little deep here. Inaction is probably the most powerful action of all, in that if you get the sense that your leadership is ducking on an issue, it hurts the respect of the leaders, and it shows essentially the pathway to a whole lot of trouble within the organization, because you see your leaders flinch and you find out that they don't have the principles that you thought they had.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. I agree. I mean, micromanagement is a problem, right? We're guys who are, guys or women who are micromanaging their workforce, right? That's a problem. But I think a bigger problem sometimes, and we don't talk about it, is absent managers, people that just, step away and let things happen, and things get out of control really quick when there's no one just kind of keeping an eye on, keeping the hand on the tiller and making sure that the boat's going in the right direction, right? Just let anything go, and those ships go, they run aground sometimes, is what happens when you're not paying attention.
Exactly. That happens every day.
Yeah, sadly. So I understand now you're going around the country and you're teaching organizations about how to fireproof their cultures, how to fireproof their companies. What type of organizations have you been working with, and what have been their biggest problems, and how have you been helping them kind of sort out how to deal with this particular issue in the workplace?
And I'm going to get general in some ways on this, and I'll get specific in others. There's that political answer for you. I'm working with everything from corporations to church groups to law enforcement organizations and governmental entities. And all of those have different sets of issues, but a lot of it always goes back to leadership in some way. In churches, you've had scandals that all start with people with very strong beliefs in a certain set of areas that bring them together, that when they see something that makes them uncomfortable, or they don't know how to respond, or they've got a friend who may be involved in it, they look the other way and terrible stuff happens. In working with law enforcement, I have utmost respect for them. They've got one of the toughest jobs in the world, but they've had challenges with their people as well. So over the next few weeks, I have the privilege of going to a number of law enforcement and first responders, so police and fire, chiefs organizations, to help them build stronger cultures that protect against everything from corruption to harassment to bullying, things that break down their incredible mission and hurt them in the long run. And we've seen as cultural standards have changed, but also as crises have popped up, they're as vulnerable as anyone, and especially in the high stress jobs that they're in. When mistakes are made, they tend to be doozies. And
yeah, they're big. Yeah,
I really have an opportunity to reach out to them, talking about my fireproofing message of you need to bring some of the same acuity and vision that you have in all aspects of your job, bring them internal. The value statements of how you want to reach out to the community and be seen, are your people feeling it on the inside, that respect, those standards, and those types of things. So whether it's the corporate or law enforcement, you name it, there's some real opportunities there, especially, as you say, with how much is in the news these days, to draw on some of that and help them do even greater things.
Okay, interesting. So that's good. It's interesting that law enforcement are seeking this out. I guess if you have a toxic situation in a law enforcement organization, that can be that makes headlines pretty quick, I would imagine.
It does. There is, and it touches so closely to communities.
Yes.
When you have order, that's a wonderful thing. When you have chaos, not so much.
Not a good thing.
And these are good folks that numbers wise, no matter where you are, you have a few knuckleheads or a few folks that go beyond knucklehead status to do some bad things that can really spoil all the good work that's done.
Absolutely. So this being a leadership podcast, I wanted to get your take on, I want to ask you this. In your opinion, what are some characteristics of great leaders? So a leader worth following, what are some characteristics that you would say that would be in a great leader?
Well, for my topic of talking about culture and organizations, somebody that fully understands their role and understands that they have superpowers that only people at their level of the organization can have. And that is being that example, that they're going to set rules and they're going to follow their own rules. It's huge today.
Yes,
it's huge at any time, but even more so from what we've seen in recent years. A leader needs to be somebody that is that's committed to, and you touch on this constantly, and I love it. That person that's going to know the names of the kids and of the employees and the wives or husbands that your employees see when you go home, and that you're going to be active and leading. That word right there, it's a verb, it's an action word. Just because if you're in leadership, you better be doing some action rather than sitting back and letting the action come to you.
That's great. So you guys heard that from Pete himself. He says it's leadership is an action. It's a verb. It's to get things done, not to sit back and let things happen. So that's great. I appreciate it.
There's going to be an English teacher bashing me for my construction of that.
Me too. So I'm an engineer by training, so I have an excuse. So, so thank you very much for your time, Pete. I think this has been really helpful, and it's definitely a subject that I don't touch on that much. So I really like that you bring that perspective into this podcast, and we can talk about it, because I really think that this is an important aspect of leadership. You've got to watch out for that person drilling a hole in the boat. Even if you're doing everything right, there can be someone out there that is trying to take down what you're trying to do. So this is good input. So how can people get more information about this book, or to get help in addressing their cultural challenges in their organization?
They can go to, if they'd like a signed copy of my book, they can go to arsonistintheoffice.com. And that is what they'll see there is not only a way to get the book, but my blog is connected to that through PeteHavel.com, HAV as in victory, EL.com. And then I'm also on Amazon as well. Competing against you, John, trying to match your sales every day. But the other way they can reach out to me is directly to give me a call. My number is 855-NO-ARSON, ARSON. So 855-NO-ARSON. And then they can shoot me an email at any time at pete@petehavel.com or LinkedIn or any of that good stuff. I'm everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay. And I will add these links in our show notes as well so people can find it. But leaders, I highly encourage you to pick up this book. It's a great book. I've read the book and I've also listened to an Audible. I really like the way Pete did the Audible part of it here, just in terms of the actors and the voices. So, but either way, it's a great resource to learn about this important topic. So, leaders, it's just a matter of time until you're going to face an arsonist of your own. So listen to what Pete has to say, read this book, understand how this can affect you, and get prepared now. The best way to be ready for this kind of situation is to read a book like this and get up to speed before it actually happens to you. And always remember, leaders, you need to run to the fire, not away from the fire. So thank you, Pete, and I appreciate all your insight and appreciate for you being the actual first guest on the Deep Leadership Podcast. So thank you.
Always glad to be a guinea pig. Thank you, John.
So that's it for today. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.